Well, welcome to the Autosport Q&A video, another weekly edition where we ask you to get your questions in and I pose those questions to our esteemed panel. Unfortunately this week we've got Haydn and Kevin, but I'll come to that in just a bit. Now, if you want to get your questions in, you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you put them in the comments below or keep your eyes open on Instagram for our call outs. Also on the autosport.com news page at the start of each week where you can put your questions in, and then every week we'll put them to our panel. Now, as I say, I'm joined this week by Kevin Turner and by Haydn Cobb. It's great to have you here. First of all, how are you doing, Kevin? It's been a week. A new shirt.
Well, it's the same shirt as last week, but It was new last week, so it still stays new. But what's new is I've got far less downforce, so haircut. And I've managed to slash my face to pieces, which is why I look even worse than normal. So apologies for that. Yeah.
If you're listening to this, then make sure you tune in on the video to see how bad Kevin's
No, I would say that you've got it the right way around. Let's stick to that.
Hayden, you're looking fresh. Hayden, no cuts on your face.
Actually, there is one there. It was a couple of days ago, though, so it's faded. But yeah, I'm doing well. I've clearly served my punishment because I've not spoken to you guys for a while on the podcast.
Ages,
Videocast, whatever.
It's been bliss, isn't it?
Yeah. But no, it's good to be here. It's lovely. Ready to get going, yeah.
Well, quickly address the elephant in the room. I have got a cold, but I will plough through like a man and only
heroically.
Heroically only reference it periodically every 4 or 5 minutes. That's
got a limit.
No, I got 10. 10.
Oh wow!
Yeah, okay. So it's fine. So your questions have been put to our panel. I will put the questions to both of you and see where it goes, really. We'll kick it off, shall we? A lot of news has been released this week ahead of the Las Vegas Grand Prix, which is on a Saturday night, Sunday morning, really, but Saturday night. I'm not sure how I feel about that. But anyway, Max on Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, whatever it's called, asks even, who should we expect to be strong at the final 3 races, and should we expect another 2021-esque season next year if the field convergence continues? Oof, it's a double-barrel question.
First bit, or I could say the first bit in terms of it's a nice selection of a trio of tracks to finish off the year because they've all got very, very different characteristics. I mean, Vegas in itself is a massive outlier just through the temperature running at night. They've only had one race there, and it was a big learning curve for everyone. Last year, we saw Verstappen in that almighty Red Bull perform very well, but pushed all the way by Leclerc, and the Ferrari seemed quite strong there. So this time around, obviously, Red Bull were not got their head and shoulders above everyone else. Ferrari should be strong there, given the progress they've made. But of course, McLaren, who lead the constructors, have performed very well on street tracks lately. So yeah, it should be a decent battle between the top 3 teams. And you get to Qatar, which is, in theory, should be very, very hot and a high-speed track. Where McLaren should favour them, should do well, but Ferrari shouldn't be too far away from that. And then Abu Dhabi sort of sits in the middle of that, has high speed, has low speed. And again, you'd say it should be a good fight between Red Bull, McLaren. I'm going to say the same thing for all 3, really. But yeah, it's a good combo.
Not mention Mercedes at any point in that, by the way.
No, that is true.
No, I think they need to be looking at 25, don't they, with where they've been recently. But I'd say, McLaren, Qatar and Abu Dhabi, I think, would be the favourite. I think Las Vegas could be quite interesting because, like Haydn says, Ferrari probably should have won last year, actually. If you remember, there was a bit of sort of safety car shenanigans that helped Max Verstappen out, and the first corner, which we won't go into because I don't want to get any more hate mail. But
not referencing not the driving off track. No,
that doesn't happen.
Okay, carry on.
But Ferrari, one of the reasons that Ferrari quit last year was because of the way they could warm up the tyres. But of course, the downside of that was other tracks they had high tyre degradation, and I think Charles Leclerc has already said, "Well, look, we've solved that problem at other races." But that means that we might not be as good at Las Vegas. So I think that's this weekend's kind of the most interesting one. Then you'd expect McLaren to be good for the last couple of races.
Before we hit the second part of that question about 2025, is there any conceivable scenario where Red Bull reclaim top spot in the constructors or second place in the constructors, or does it look like it's McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull as the season plays out?
It's not impossible, but the major factor in that is what does Sergio Perez produce, really, because, constructors, it's 2 drivers, cumulative points. We can fairly safely assume that the combo at McLaren and Ferrari will pick up a collection of decent points haul. But Red Bull all year, and most of last year as well, let's be fair, it's been one driver bringing home all the points. And so in terms of where they can bring the fight, they probably can, you're right, but where Perez then needs to be, which we've said for so long, Perez needs to be in the fight at the front, podium contention. which he hasn't looked or hasn't really been, with the sort of exception of Baku, from pretty much the first few rounds of the season.
Just looking at my phone, and it's the sort of thing I do on the train the way, in is screen grab articles and bits of articles that are on autosport.com as well. And there was this fact that Perez has only scored 48 points in the last 15 Grand Prix compared to Max's 257, which is shocking reading. But it is a two-driver scenario when it comes down to the constructors. So with that thought in mind, is it conceivable that it's McLaren, Ferrari fighting for the top spot, and could McLaren lose it? Or is this the pivotal one for them? McLaren need to just gain some decent points.
It should be McLaren, shouldn't it? Like they have had certainly this halfway. They've had the better car, and as Haydn said, they've got two drivers up at the front. Yeah. Usually, they are ahead in the points as well. Remember that, it's not nothing. So they should be able to see it out now. You'd like to think they've perhaps had their strategic blunders that have lost them points, and they've got used to being a front running team again. We see that sometimes when teams get back to the front, that they actually aren't thinking like consistent winners, whereas Red Bull just are all the time. So I wouldn't rule out a win or two from Verstappen to keep Red Bull in the hunt. But you've got to think that it should be McLaren that sees out the constructors' title.
So part two of that question then, next year with the convergence of the field, is it going to be a very tight race? Can maybe Mercedes join that party a little bit, or are they still going to be hanging on to the coattails of the rest of them?
I mean, that's the hope, right? So we've seen it this year that all four of those teams have won races. Yeah. McLaren and Ferrari have certainly caught up Red Bull. Now, how much of that is Red Bull kind of going down the wrong path, and then they'll get back to the top if they can sort that out. But then they don't have obviously some key people like Adrian Newey for next year. So you'd like to think that those three should be in the mix. I think that McLaren's progress has been well documented and very rapid actually. But Ferrari under Vassar, I think, have quietly been coming along as well. They don't make the strategic errors and all that sort of thing. So they look like a good unit, and you can't not think that Mercedes will get there. But I've been saying that for the last 3 years. So
I'd say out of the top four teams, three of them have got major question marks, and Red Bull's case is the answer, and then the following question is not even there yet in terms of who will be Verstappen's teammate. Now you listen to Perez and everything that's said, it's going to be him. He's got a contract, this, that, and the other. But let's be honest, until they actually announce where he is, where Lawson is, etc., we don't know for sure.
But also we know that there are clauses in that contract about the points deficits behind Verstappen at key junctures in the season. So it could be that arguably they can say you've fallen way behind the expectations, so we can withdraw that contract.
Exactly. So that's part one in terms of where the Red Bull stack up. If we're looking at purely constructors, I mean, car pace and all this and other, like last year, they could have a massively dominant car. Verstappen carries a team happy days, and it sort of answers that problem. But for their point, let's assume there is a convergence and they don't have a super dominant car. They're going to be in a situation like this, depending on who their second driver is. Ferrari, now obviously they've got a very well-known talent, and he's got the track record to prove it in Lewis Hamilton that's coming in, but he's got to adapt and adjust to the team and everything that comes with it. So there's always that little bit of a question mark. And then Mercedes, again, their car, they've got a lot of work to do, but they're bringing in a rookie in Antonelli. And unless he produces Lewis Hamilton rookie levels of performances and results, they are going to be sort of a little bit on the back foot because of it being the two-car team structure. I
think Constructors' Championship-wise, for all those reasons, it's going to be between McLaren and Ferrari next year, unless Red Bull pull away from the pack again, for all those reasons. Yeah. But from a convergence, who's going to win this weekend, hopefully there'll be the four teams in it. One difference I think we should make clear between now and the 2020-2021 scenarios, Mercedes had the fastest car in F1 history in 2020 and obliterated the opposition. The reason that we then had convergence in 21 was really down to the floor tweak, which they got wrong. Red Bull got right in it, it threw it slightly advantageous to Red Bull, but not by a huge amount. We had a championship fight. So whereas this is this feels like a more natural conversion under a mature rule set. So in a way, that's more encouraging that there are more teams getting to the same sort of optimum.
So the answer is, for 2025, the great unknowns, until we know who's in that Red Bull second seat, it's difficult to know where they're going to be from a package, a driver package as well. But for McLaren, that's the stable team because they're going to keep the same driver pairing.
Yeah, their problem will be taking points off each other.
Yeah.
So Ferrari and McLaren, do you want a strong number one or do you want two quite evenly matched drivers?
Yeah.
McLaren, they have made this season interesting, let's be honest, but they've also been very reluctant to issue team orders even when it's been really obvious.
Yeah.
So fresh slate, Piastri an extra year under his belt, I think that they will almost certainly take points off each other. Whereas if the Red Bull's in the mix, whenever it's winning, it's going to be Max. So it might be one of those where, again, Red Bull lose the constructors, but Max ends up being drivers' champion.
Which largely tells the story of the middle chunk of the season just gone, with Piastri taking points off Norris, or McLaren decisions sort of taking points off Norris, and therefore not maximising his fight in the drivers' title. And that's sort of not the whole reason of this deficit he has to Verstappen going into Vegas, but it's a chunk of it. And if you reduce that down, the pressure mounts up. Who knows what it looks like?
I think we should say Norris-amising when we're talking about Lando. Norris and maximising when we're talking about Max. If we can keep that rule of thumb. Kevin, you're not on board with this.
Want to use that for headlines?
No, I'm not sure that's going to work.
Fine,
it'd also
right.
be Lando-mising, wouldn't it, if it was maximising?
Well, all right, fine. All right. I'm an ideas guy, right? It's not so
we'll fine-tune it.
Yeah, exactly. We'll tweak it by 2025. Okay, so it's a great unknown. We'll have to wait and see. But in theory, it should be a closer season, or following suit from this year as well, depending what happens at Red Bull and what the other teams do over the winter. It's going to be interesting to see what Lewis does as well, because if Mr. Hamilton can adapt to that car very quickly, it's going to be how he and Charles Leclerc work together as a partnership.
I think if the car's good enough, he's still got one mega season left in him to kind of, because it sounds ridiculous for someone who's won more World Championship Grand Prix than anyone else and is a 7-time World Champion, but I think he does feel that he probably wants to, after 2021, has something to prove. So I think if the car is in the mix, I think we'll see Lewis have a nice Indian summer, as it were. If the car's a bit pants and Leclerc's having to haul it on knife edge qualifying, sometimes he's on the front row, sometimes he's in the wall, not sure whether Lewis will be quite so keen.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think with all eyes on the reg change for 26 as well, it could be a very sort of midway through the season. If it's not looking like a title fight, it's sort of right off of everything's being prepared for next year, and they'll play it all down, which you can say, I'm sure a lot of teams and drivers will be using that excuse at various points next year.
You'll be able to plot that announcement as to where they've given up on the championship. We're focusing on 2026. Yeah. The earlier they say it, the more they don't think they're going to win it.
Toto Wolff's been out, hasn't he? Not changing what he said, but just addressing what was stated that he said about Lewis Hamilton, and saying that it was taken out of context as well. He wasn't saying the driver is certainly not able to win a title or is a great driver. He's clarified that point, hasn't he? That Lewis still has could still do it. He's still a good enough driver.
Yeah, well, they're mates as well, aren't they? And I think Hamilton said a few things when he was frustrated. Looking forward to Christmas, all the rest of it, which probably made Mercedes feel a bit like, so. Toto Wolff then made his comments, and then afterwards they've gone, no, actually, that was all a bit. Yeah. Let's not worry about that. So they made up again.
It's Christmas. It's a time for happiness, right?
I'm not ready for Christmas.
The clock is ticking. Right, okay. Next question then. Matt from Instagram. It's just Matt. I don't know which Matt, but it's Matt from Instagram asks, what steps have been taken to ensure a smoother running of the Vegas event this year? Matt, I don't know what you're referring to. What has been done to address, Drain Gate as well to start with, but what has been done in Vegas?
Yeah, so in theory, and of course they're going to say this, and you expect it to be fine, they have welded all down all drains fully, properly, learnt those lessons that destroyed the Thursday night running, which was Friday morning for us in Europe. So that, in theory, should be okay. They've actually brought forward the practice session times a little bit to try and keep the track a bit warmer at night time in the middle of the desert. It's going to work to a certain or lesser extent, but yeah. And generally, they'll have that year two learnings of just the general running of an event. Obviously, it was the first time Formula One management themselves have run their own event, and from start to finish, everything in between. So hopefully in terms of ticketing and basically providing for fans on what they want, because there was a lot of tension and not quite delivering in terms. I know, again, it was down to the drains, but with the whole FP2 effectively being run behind closed doors because the marshals and the fan marshals couldn't stay there because of their contracted hours. It was all a bit messy. Granted, no one would have foreseen what happened, so I don't really necessarily think the blame's there, but it is a case of learning from that to provide a better product, better racing. Basically make everything run smoother from a scheduling, general programming.
Yeah, you'd like to think they're going to get there. I think it's probably worth mentioning as well that they've got an extra challenge of keeping a lot of those businesses open. Whereas other street venues, they just close everything and it's tough. Whereas they haven't got that, so they've had an extra logistical problem. So yeah, I'm sure they'll sort it out. I think the bigger question is almost like the FIA throwing in the curveball of race control changes just before.
Yeah, which I'm not sure if this question was.
It's not, but it's definitely worth bringing in, because if we're going to talk about a smooth running, and you've got rid of the race director like that, a drop of a hat, click of a finger, whatever you want to call it. It was immediate effect, wasn't it?
Strange timing. Given there's 3 races left of the year, and obviously there's talk of why and who and what, whether he pushed, did he step down, and generally, what's gone on in the background there, and that will be front and centre for the FIA, but for Formula One being it's their thing, and given the relationships between the FIA and Formula One management haven't been super in the last few years, it has, in fairness, the last few months, let's say, it's got a bit better, and then we had Sweargate. Which made it sort of dampen down again, and that conflicted the drivers against the FIA rather than, say, Formula One management. They sort of stayed away from that. But now it's like, right, the FIA has to run Formula One's own event, if that is a fair way of describing it. But with a rookie race director now, Rui Marquez has got experience. Formula 2, Formula 3, was the race director for Macau Grand Prix just gone, and that had plenty of red flags and disruption.
Lots of practice. I mean, more practice doing red flags and safety cars and restarts than he would have done just having a race going on.
Yeah, so me calling him a rookie is probably a bit unfair, let's say, but at the same time,
level of intensity and speculation and eyes on him as well. I mean,
and the F1 team bosses and all that sort of stuff. I know they can't knock on the door during the race in quite the same way they could before, but yeah, it's quite hostile. It's a hostile environment, difficult job that. It's like, it's hard enough being a referee and a football match, isn't it? But being being race control.
And so to go back to the question, I think originally perhaps it was posed with the issues we saw last year. All being well, everyone will hope and expect those issues not to be repeated. But there's a lot of other new issues that weren't necessarily Formula One created that will have to be dealt with and see how it all interacts.
But it should be a smoother event because they've had one under their belt. Anyway, from a logistical perspective, what about from the razzmatazz? Because we know Max Verstappen, for example, was very outspoken about the razzmatazz, couldn't stand it. In fact, said it was really embarrassing, the whole revealing the driver thing. And
but it's not for Vegas, right? It's not for them or us, is it? It's not for the hardcore motorsport fans that have been following Formula One for decades. It's for the new Drive to Survive crowd, the American fans. That's what they expect from a sporting event. So, I mean, it's not my bag, but I can see why they're doing it. It's not the thing that I would. It's not the hill I'd die on. Let's put it that way.
Will they tweak it, do you think, to find a compromise point, Vegas, or will they?
I think so, in terms of there's not going to be the grand unveiling that there was last year. And this was on the Wednesday night with the sort of podiums lifting up the drivers and the various call-outs, things like that. There will still be huge razzmatazz and extravaganza and very odd things happening, but seeing Villeneuve getting married in the paddock, that in theory won't happen again.
Not for a year or so anyway.
You'd assume not. I think his wedding vows still remain
intact.
So but I think that's the whole point of this race and why they've set it up as it is to have these very unusual, very but then newsworthy and talking points for other fans that you don't get in any other race on the calendar.
It's why it's at night, isn't it? Because they want to have the strip looking like the Vegas Strip and make it iconic. That's why it's a night race, essentially. Okay, so we can put that one to bed. We'll have to wait and see as to whether or not they've...
It'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
It'll be fine.
And if not, go with the flow, Vegas style, baby.
Yeah.
GB Mike 44 on Autosport.com asks, why... Oh, I hate this so much. It's a great question, Mike, by the way. Why is the freebie red flag tyre change issue not fixed? Is it an unfair rule? Discuss.
I'll let you start on this.
Okay, fine. I think it exists because if someone has, you can imagine if you get rid of it and then someone's forced to restart on an old tyre that might be damaged and then that causes an accident, you have a Verstappen, Baku type blowout or something like that, then... it's the rules that have forced them into a potentially dangerous situation. I agree that from a sporting point of view, it's really annoying. But then if you say, okay, well, you can only change the tyre if there's a safety concern. Well, who decides at what point the tyre is? Because the teams are going to be going, oh, these tyres are terrible. We're going to need to put a whole new force, do you know what I mean? No set on. And then the steward's going to want to go, or who's making that decision? Who's saying to them, no, you can't, or yes, you can? So, yes, I don't like the rule. It is annoying, but I'm not sure the alternative is really any. I'm not sure I can think of an alternative that doesn't have other problems.
You're right in that, in terms of the alternatives have their own troubles. One could be, so the red flag's completed, the track's repaired, off they go again, but you allow people to then make a pit stop as it would be behind a safety car, assuming the pit lane's open, of course, and therefore they take a similar penalty as you in terms of time to as you would if you pitted under a safety car, which in theory would be the same amount as those that say had pitted just before, or like in terms of that. So you couldn't necessarily game the system because you know that you've got that risk of, right, well, if we wait and gamble on a red flag, at least there's the same punishment as, let's say, as those who didn't gamble but lost out. But again, yeah, there's ways to work around it. So
that suggestion would be that you restart the race under a safety car, and then pit stops can be completed in the first lap or two before they release the cars.
Effectively, or if you gave them, if they because they always need normally one lap.
Yeah.
That's the opportunity to pit, and then you get going sort of straight away after that. But obviously, if you have a standing start, that doesn't really work because...
Yeah. So. What about adding on the pit stop time at the end of the race to those who took their tyre change under the red flag? Saying, okay, it's a 36-second in-out from line to line. So you cross the line at the end of the race, we had 36 seconds to your time, and that is where the chips fall.
I think that would probably discourage people from just doing it at all, because obviously you would lose more.
Exactly, but that then removes that problem. I mean, I'm not fixing it here. I'm just coming up with, like I say, I'm an ideas guy. And they're not always good ideas. But, is there not...
seen that in other series where they just add some time.
Yeah. They call the cars invisible out on track.
But of course, the added problem you've got with Formula One is how powerful the teams are, as we've seen with other topics that we might come to later. So it's much harder to just be the governing body and say, right, this is what's happening without lots of politics going on. So... I mean, I would say at the moment it is the same for everyone. It could work for you one week and not the next. We've seen it a few times over the years. It's not my favourite rule. I quite like the safety car thing, but then that takes you away from a standing start, which people like. Exactly, people don't like restarts under safety cars. So, I don't think there's a perfect solution. The reason this is more of a problem these days is because there are more red flags and safety cars than there used to be, which is something you can't really change either because of safety and tracks.
Is it also a problem because... there's a lot of audience that are Max Verstappen fans, and a lot of the audience in Formula 1 that are Lando Norris fans, etc., etc. And this one, again, went Max Verstappen's favour, and everyone's sick and tired of Max winning, even though it was a big chunk of time between this victory and his previous victory, and it was a phenomenal drive in Brazil. Is it anything to do with that, or is it literally people just don't like the idea of the tyre?
Well, I think that's probably why certain people would have complained about it, and it would have been different people if it had been the other way around. Right. But I still think it is a fair question to ask.
Yeah.
That rule does seem a bit, even if it's the other way around, let's say it's the other way around, it's a bit unsatisfactory, isn't it? Because you've not, what we were robbed of in Brazil was a fight between the Verstappen coming through and the guys who were already up front, because they just were removed from the equation. So that's not a criticism of Verstappen. Like we talked about this on previous episodes. It's still a great drive, but it would have been a greater race if we could have seen that fight play out.
It is similar to Baku in 21 when Max hit the wall, red flag, they all changed their tyres and off they go. Then Lewis made the big fatal error of leaving his magic on and overcooked it on the braking, and that ultimately cost him the championship, because if he'd finished in the top 4 or 5 of that race, what happened in Abu Dhabi, final race of the season, wouldn't have mattered. So it does come into play. Luck has to be on your side, but it's also who's the bravest staying out on those tyres for the longest. In Brazil, Max stayed out. He took the gamble, he took the risk, and it paid dividends in the end. So I guess, as you say, it might not be the best rule, but is it the best rule of the options? Maybe.
I mean, that is a good point. You play the rules that exist, and everyone knew that was the rule that existed at Interlagos, and so why did Mercedes and McLaren pit and Red Bull not?
Exactly. It's fair for everyone in terms of everyone has the same choice, let's say, and I think if you ask teams, yeah, what do they actually want? And it's fair competition. That this is the rule that is probably as most fair because it gives the decision by and large to the teams.
Yeah. Great question, Mike. Thank you very much for that. GB Mike 44, who got in touch on autosport.com. You can do exactly the same thing by getting your questions to us or on autosport.com, on Instagram, or commenting on this video on YouTube. Next question. I don't know how to pronounce the name, but I'm going to go for Bnarb. Bnarb, all right? Bnarb. On autosport.com, Kevin, your face just there was a picture. What is the end state of the seemingly rising tension between the GPDA and FIA? One can only speculate as to the answer, but I don't foresee things simmering down. That's a good question. You brought it up earlier on, didn't you, Haydn?
Yeah. What's the end game?
Yeah, what is the end game?
Tough one. I guess it's I think reading what the Grand Prix Drivers Association's letter wrote in terms of basically want to be treated like adults and have a bit more of a mature conversation about it. I think taking that on its word, I think that's probably, you'd hope, quite a realistic thing whereby the FIA or the FIA president in particular does speak to the drivers, perhaps in the driver briefing, and goes, here are the things we're trying to improve or change, or these are the reasons. And then they have a debate and a back and forth of what certain rules and certain punishments are here for and whether it's right or wrong. You sort of need them all to sit down and have that conversation. And there's no reason why it can't happen in Vegas or it can't happen in Qatar or Abu Dhabi, but I'd be surprised if it did. And there's lots of reasons for that, but particularly with Vegas and that timings, and yeah, they keep the driver racing sort of efficient and quick as possible, and then off they go. They've got media obligations as drivers, media obligations or sponsors, this, that, and the other. And then suddenly, 3 weeks down the line, the race is gone, everyone's on their holidays. So it needs to be discussed between the two parties, and a frank and honest talks should be happening. But you sort of need both parties to sit down and do it. And will they in Vegas? Well, everyone will be looking to find out.
Oh, it's handbags at dawn, isn't it? It's a bit. It's not the most. I don't think we're heading for a 1982 style driver strike, right,
with
super licenses and all that sort of stuff. I mean, but basically the idea of not having the jury in the car, actually quite a sensible move. My kid has to, the kids at my football, have to take their jury before they do a sporting event. That's pretty normal. It's just the swearing thing. We've talked about that before. It's not an unreasonable thing to raise. It's the way it's been done that they're unhappy about, and I have sympathy for the GPDA on that. But you'd think that they should be able to sort that out fairly simply. And also remember the FIA have been involved in the work on the cooling suits for the drivers after they had various health issues last season in the extreme heat. So that is something the FIA is doing for the drivers. Yeah, so it's not. I don't think it's that bad. I think a bigger question really is probably what's going on at the FIA in general and how that affects its relationship with Liberty and F1. I think there's a lot of good people who have left the organisation in the last 2 years, and that's a little bit more concerning. Like what is going on internally at the FIA, because they're quite a secretive organisation. It's probably fair to say in a modern context, anyway. So yeah, does that mean there's something coming? Like what's MBS? What's on his agenda next?
Yeah,
so that's I think more significant than the GPDA thing, to be honest.
MBS being Mohammed bin Salman.
Yes,
if you're listening or watching this, I'm not quite sure, the FIA president, but yeah. But that is the alarming thing, isn't it? That if you are watching this from the outside and there's a lot of changes within the operation, the organisation, does that speak volumes more than what the president put out there about please don't swear on, please don't put these swearing videos out, that we don't want the young audience to see it, yada, yada, yada. Is that the thing we should be focusing more on, that they seem to be on this very, very turbulent time?
Yeah, I think it's spot on. Basically what's going on at the FIA is the main question, because, we said this question was focused on GDPA and the FIA, but it's fair to say it's the FIA are always the party involved in these current sort of standoffs or arguments. But whether it's the F1 teams, whether it's Formula 1 management, it always seems to be them sort of rotated between a fight and who they try and take on. And again, I think when you boil it down to very sort of the principles and the basics of it, there is a fundamental thought process and good trying to be implemented. It's as Kevin said earlier, it's the way it's communicated or the way it is constructed has been nothing short of terrible, really. The swearing thing, I felt like that really was a non in my opinion, non-issue. But going to the media saying like this, using the rappers line, which was not wise, and then the fallout from that, and Verstappen getting the punishment and then taking his own media duties away from the FIA press conferences in Singapore. It just sort of fanned the flames massively. And again, it could have been a very simple case of, right, the FIA sit down with all the drivers, Grand Prix Drivers Association, before interviews and that, and go, this is what we need from you guys. Please, no swearing in official capacities for this. This is why. And go from there.
Unfortunately, it comes across as, from the outside looking, as a dictatorship on one side and drivers taking their toys away when they don't like something going on. That's the perception, isn't it?
It's a bad sell for F1 either
both,
way, isn't it?
Each side of the fence, yeah.
I think quite key in this is the tone is set by the president. So if we go back to the 80s, Jean-Marie Bellest, who is loathed by many from the time, was very much, he wanted the FIA to be involved in everything, and that then created the situation against the Formula 1 Constructors Association and Bernie, and it all got very political and very bad, and there were races stripped from the championship and all that sort of stuff. And then you contrast that with someone like Jean Todt, who didn't regard the FIA's job as being those things, and he worked actually, considering his profile coming in was higher. Maybe that's why he'd done his bit in the spotlight, winning World Sports Car Championships in Formula 1 with Ferrari. He's like, right, this is what I believe the FIA should be. And I would say Souleyem is somewhere between the two, isn't he? He's not. I don't think he's as destructive as Bellest, but he wants to be involved. He's always in part firm A.
Yeah.
He's the one delivering a lot of the messaging. So that's where the confrontational, dictatorial thing, I think, comes from. So he'd probably be better off, like we've said before, backing it off slightly. But he's obviously quite confrontational, because you can't help but think that that's got to be part of the reason why so many people have left. It's like my way or the highway, which is a risky strategy, because who do you replace those people with?
Yeah, and continuity is always important in any organisation as well. You see old analogies, but Manchester United, when Moyes took over and he brought all his backroom staff in from Everton, and then they were trying to teach football players how to win titles when they'd not won any, and he was shipped out. And you think you've got to sometimes keep the stability there to when it's not a new broom every time, is it? You've got to keep the triggers old broom there and work it through. CM Parfait I'm really nervous reading some of these names out, by the way. It feels like a Simpsons game. But CM Parfait on Twitter asks, with Greg Maffei stepping down as CEO of F1's owners Liberty Media, does this increase the chances of Andretti getting on the grid? More than a yes or no answer, please.
I hope so. I think that there are certain people at Liberty who obviously don't want the Andretti name in the F1 paddock. And I think that, he might be one of them, in which case him going obviously helps the Andretti cause a bit, but I doubt he's the only one. And obviously you've got to bring the teams in as well. About they don't want to share the enormous pie by 11; they only want to share it by 10. So, which we've talked about before, is just outrageous and ridiculous, given how much more value there is in the Formula 1 team now than there was even 5 years ago. So yes, I'm going to go with hopefully it does.
Yeah, and I'll say, sure, but with many, many more hurdles get in the way. It's not.
Now you're just being realistic.
I know, it's not like he is the gatekeeper
No.
to Formula 1. There's votes. There's so many different criteria that they need to meet, and obviously, from Andretti's point of view, they passed them through from the FIA, but then it was sent to FOM, which is the complicated way of how this series works. That's when they hit the roadblock, and it wasn't just Greg Maffei saying no. Basically, there was obviously the teams, the commercial implications, and beyond that. So, yeah, there's unfortunately there's probably a long way to go. This isn't just suddenly right, Andretti on 11th team, let's go.
Yeah.
But maybe it gives them a bit more momentum. They go push again and put forward that business plan, because I hope, and it certainly seemed to be the case at the time of when it was originally rejected, was these are the things that you need to achieve to basically come again and try your hand at it. And it's fair to say Andretti and those that they've been still hiring, still preparing, have been building to that. And you ask anyone from that organisation, they're still preparing for that, okay, belated, but Formula One entry. So, yeah, if they keep working at it, and maybe they see that as a bit more of an encouragement and go from there.
Or it may be all irrelevant if they just go and buy Alpine.
That's true.
Oh,
That's true.
I mean, come on. Don't be so ridiculous.
Sorry.
But there is that. I mean, the fans, there's definitely a thirst, isn't there, from the fans that to have an Andretti team on the grid and an 11th team. I think the fans are like, well, have 22 cars. What's the problem?
I mean, it's probably one of the things that would unite pretty much all fans. Like if we do most polls or most things, it's going to be split across fan, with different drivers or teams. But this would be surely pretty much everyone will go, yeah. You want an extra car, a couple of cars, extra couple of drivers. Yeah, Andretti name's a great one. Bring a big brand with them. Like from a fan point of view, it's an absolute no-brainer, isn't it?
Yeah. Maybe our producer will put that question to the listeners and the viewers at some stage. Last question then. James on Instagram asks, is the Mercedes-era of Valtteri Bottas the best teammate F1 has ever seen? This is obviously Lewis that said that Bottas was his best ever teammate. I'm going to throw Barrichello in the ring.
That's the name that sprung to my mind.
Can I talk about that ridiculously long feature I did a couple of years ago?
You certainly can.
So this was a who's the greatest number two was effectively the start point. And when I did this, I think it might have been when Bottas moved on from Mercedes. Can't remember.
Yeah.
But it was basically if you score, I think it was something like 80% or more of your teammate, then you're effectively a number one as well, or a number 1.5. So you then got, you've got a different problem to manage. If you scored less than about 55% of your team leader, then you weren't pulling your weight and it was too reliant on the number one. So you want to be in that 55 to 80 spot consistently. And the people that did it the most often and got the most titles in a front running team, because obviously it's difficult to do it with further backs, fewer points, etc. It was Valtteri Bottas at Mercedes or Rubens Barrichello at Michael Schumacher's era Ferrari. So I think that they were the two that I picked out as being my top number two drivers of all time in F1.
Yeah, I don't remember. No,
it's so hard to argue with that, though, isn't it?
It's very
look at the facts. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we're speaking in the context of Valtteri Bottas going to be no longer on the Formula One grid from next year, having lost his place at Sauber, which brings to end for now. Let's say a career it's had its moments. He's a multiple Grand Prix winner. Has led the Drivers' Championship, albeit very, very briefly, but did after his win in Australia. But I guess it never quite sparkled, never quite starred. And it's fair to say he was alongside Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes. There's a fair few reasons as to why that was the case, but it's certainly not a career that anyone would look at and go, oh, what a waste of time and opportunity and talent.
Yeah, I think he's probably a bit underrated now because obviously he's been in a car that's like can't score a point.
Yes, yeah.
So, but if you look back, he was very close to Lewis Hamilton in raw pace. Where he tended to lose out was usually if you had to improvise wheel to wheel, cold tyre, wet, that sort of stuff is where Hamilton had an advantage. Tyre, looking after the tyre, but that's why Hamilton's one of the greats of all time. It doesn't mean that Bottas was no good. And going back to the Constructors' Championship thing, it is Bottas beating Sergio Perez in 2021, which meant Mercedes got the Constructors' title. So, I think he's got to be in the mix. I kind of think of all the people we're losing off the F1 grid for next year, he's the one I'm kind of saddest about, even though he's had a perfectly good career, and I'm sure he'll go and have lots of fun afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. And it means no Finns or no Scandinavian drivers on the grid for the first time since the late 80s, 88, I think. But people
Which is amazing, actually.
Just that whole huge passion. They don't have a race at the moment and haven't for a long time. But that fan base from Hakkinen, Raikkonen, Bottas. Okay, granted, he wasn't to those levels of popularity, but still, as a name and as a face from that part of the world, was a huge part of Grand Prix racing for the last 30 years.
There'll be another one along very, very soon, no doubt, from Finland. They've got a lot of talent in that part of the world, haven't they? So Barrichello or Bottas, you kind of both agree that it's between those two. It's a willingness, isn't it? A driver that's got a willingness to see the bigger picture and maybe to put their own dreams of being a world champion on the back burner.
Yeah, I mean, when I did the article, I had somebody, more than one person actually, suggest that the greatest number two would be Sterling Moss, but I would be massively offended by the suggestion that Moss is a number 2 driver. He just was in that role at Mercedes in 1955 and did the whole following Fangio, the Mercedes train, all that stuff. So I think he's not a career number 2 driver. No. He's one of the greats. So we're talking about drivers who aren't quite top draw, but very close.
Yeah,
they're close enough to be able to keep the sort of greats on their toes, but also play the game.
Yeah, it's interesting that both these drivers, one comes from the 90s era and one comes from the more recent times as well with Bottas, and you're not looking further back to the 80s or the 70s, really.
Well, remember, I'd have to check. It was pre-1980s, I think it was round about there, they changed the rules. So before that, your constructor score was dictated by whichever was the highest finishing car. So you only really needed, I think there was one year, 65, Clark pretty much scored all of Lotus's points. Jim Clark scored all of Lotus's points. But if you did it with a more modern system, BRM had Graham Hill and Jackie Stewart. So they would have scored a higher total of points. So the importance of a second driver became more from the sort of early 80s onwards. But it took teams a little while to cotton on. And so I think that's probably one of the reasons why it's a more recent phenomenon.
Yeah. Which is also why I suppose in the 80s as well, we saw the phenomenal partnerships going wheel to wheel and not getting on track as well. So, both those drivers that you mentioned, Bottas and Barrichello, they're no Mark Webber, though, are they? They're known. You didn't mention Mark Webber as a number 2.
So he was a little bit too close to the bottom end of the percentage.
Yeah.
Like he was in and out
a
bit more.
Famously, though, not bad for a number 2.
That's true.
Well, yes. Yeah. Well, but these sort of number 2s all have their moments where they can beat the number 1.
Yeah. I think it's also worth saying that if you offered this, if it was a trophy, let's say, to Barrichello, to Bottas, to Webber, none of them would want that trophy. I'm the best number 2 driver.
I'm the best also ran.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
Yeah, it's dabbing with very faint praise here, but that's how his career will be remembered, unfortunately.
But the biggest accolade you can give both those drivers that we mentioned, Barrichello and Bottas, there is that they were a significant part in their teammate achieving 7 world titles.
Yeah, definitely, and then the constructors that comes with it.
It comes with it, yeah.
I quite like the atmosphere that Bottas and Hamilton had. I think one of the reasons that you can be cynical about it and say Hamilton wanted Bottas there just because he knew he could beat him, but actually I think after the political and sort of off-track stuff with Nico Rosberg, which obviously really got to Hamilton, I actually think it made him a better driver. Bottas wasn't like that. Bottas has a similar view, I think, to Hamilton, which is we'll work together and then we'll sort it out on track, which is how Hamilton likes to work. And I just remember that Hungarian Grand Prix where Hamilton, the championship contender, did give the place back to Bottas because he couldn't overtake the Ferraris. And that kind of, you struggle to believe that Verstappen and Perez would operate like that.
Well, they haven't, have they?
No, exactly.
Yeah, struggle to believe it because it hasn't.
They literally don't.
They literally don't. No, gents, thank you very much as always, and thank you to you as well for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date with all of our content, and also don't forget to keep your eyes open for our questions. And when we get to it after the hangover from Vegas this weekend, put your questions to us on Monday, either in the comments below here or on Instagram or on autosport.com in the news section. As always, thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next time.